You're listening to On the Way Home with your host, Emmy Kelly.
Welcome back to On the Way Home, the podcast where we explore the people, ideas, and innovations shaping the future of housing across Canada. I'm your host, Emmy Kelly, and today I'm joined by Ene Underwood, CEO of Habitat for Humanity GTA. At a time when home ownership feels increasingly out of reach for many Canadians, Habitat GTA has released an ambitious new strategic plan, raising the bar 2,000 homes by 2030. It's a bold vision that seeks not only to build more homes, but to expand pathways to affordable home ownership for families across the GTA. Ene has spent more than a decade leading Habitat GTA through a period of tremendous change in the housing landscape. From serving on Ontario's Housing Affordability Task Force to championing approaches to affordable home ownership, Ene brings a unique perspective on where we've been, where we're headed, and what it will take to create a more affordable future. Welcome back to On the Way Home. Thank you so much for joining us, Ene. We want to start with our signature question. What does home mean to you?
You know, recently I've been thinking about this word home in the context of two things. One is the growing prevalence of the unhoused population in all of our communities in Ontario, and the other is home from the context of people who are displaced from their home and sometimes their country by war. And so when I think of home in that context, the first word that comes to me is certainty. And so, you know, certainty that you know where your stuff is from between the morning and the end of the day. You know where to find your stuff. You have confidence that you can have a decent sleep at night without the possibility of being woken in the middle of the night and fearing for your safety. You have a bathroom where you can go to the bathroom with privacy and dignity. You have you've got a place that you can invite your friends to, not 5 minutes from now, but 3 weeks from now or 3 months from now. So all these dimensions of certainty that quite honestly I just take for granted, that are a really significant part of home and yet are not available to people who are unhoused or people who are at risk of being displaced or already displaced because of war and conflict.
I love that. Sometimes we place, and there is so much relevance on housing, but the certainty of where to find your stuff. It was it's so true. If you think about, I can't find my stuff, how frustrating that gets sometimes.
Yeah, and stuff that is valuable to you. I have a knife in my kitchen drawer. I know exactly where it is, and it is a knife that I grew up in my parents' home, and it was always the icing knife for icing birthday cakes and other things. It's worthless. It means a ton to me. I know where it is. I have a place to put it. And that's something that's just really different. If you don't have that, if you're unhoused, you don't have that if you've had to flee your home with your family and think through what gets to come with you and what doesn't. So yeah, just that certainty of place.
I'm really glad that you've made it on the show because it's such an important moment in housing right now. And you've spent more than a decade leading Habitat for Humanity GTA. What changes have you seen in the affordable housing landscape since you first took on the role? And what concerns you most today?
I think, the biggest change for me is when I came into this role, affordable housing and affordable home ownership was something that we thought about as something that is important to the minority of our population. And then fast forward now 13 years later, certainly for young adults and newcomers to Canada of any age, affordable housing is something that is relevant and critical to the majority of the population. So that is such a significant swing. And then, I made reference to my childhood. I grew up in a farm in Southwest Ontario. So even then, decades ago, Toronto and Vancouver were always the places you thought, oh, I could never afford to live there. But now unaffordability is relevant in communities across the country, including my little community of 3,000 people that I grew up in. So it's flipped from being so relevant to everyone.
And tricky even now for families to reach even that level of affordability, right? Which is unfortunate.
Yeah, and I also think, sorry, when I've said it's relevant to everyone, I think whereas before the impact of housing unaffordability was more of a kind of a social construct and a philanthropic construct. But fast forward today, the impact of housing unaffordability is undermining the quality, the vitality, the economic and social well-being of our community. So even people for whom they can afford their home, housing unaffordability is so significantly affecting. Is there are they going to have good teachers at school for their kids? Can they find early childhood education when they need it? Can they find a caregiver for their aging parents? Like all these different things that are so now affected by the pervasiveness of housing unaffordability for the people who our communities need the most.
I personally was really excited to see Habitat GTA release its new strategic plan, raising the bar 2,000 homes by 2030. That is such a bold and hopeful goal. And I think it kind of blows out of the water your previous year's goals. Can you share what this plan means for Habitat and the families that you are serving over the next several years? What's different about the plan and also the approach to delivering on the plan?
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, our 2,000 homes strategic plan was finalized late last year, and it's been incredibly galvanizing for us. I think most people are familiar with kind of the name, the brand Habitat for Humanity. So we have this kind of big, well-known, well-loved brand. But in actuality, the number of homes that we've been able to deliver has been quite modest across the country and here in the GTA. And there's a lot of reasons for that. One of the reasons is affordable home ownership arguably is the most difficult part of affordable housing to deliver, partly because of price and partly because of a sense of governments that it's the notion of putting government money or sometimes philanthropic money into helping households build their own equity and wealth sometimes is counterintuitive. So that's one of the reasons why kind of getting into a bigger gear has been challenging for us. But the other part is, Jim Collins' book from so many years ago about good to great, and that image of the flywheel, that in every organization of getting to a certain point, there's a point of, you build, you work, and it still feels like you're going slow. And eventually you reach a point of momentum. And so for us over the last, decade plus, we've been chipping away at building our capacity, our development capacity, our construction capacity, the breadth of network we have with developers and with kind of other players and suppliers in the industry. And so 2,000 homes is a reflection of, we've gotten to the point where I would argue there aren't a lot of housing nonprofits that have that kind of collectivity of capacity that we have. And then you put that against the backdrop of, and we have more need than ever before, and governments, more motivated and with more programs to try to do more. So 2,000 homes is our response to all of that, and saying we are going to remain anchored in our commitment to helping young growing families access home ownership if they want it. But we are going to leverage our capacity to help other housing nonprofits be able to deliver more rental projects, more co-op projects, et cetera. And kind of that's the sum of 2,000 homes. And it's not entirely just an aspirational, a number that we pulled out of the air. It actually is a reflection, a modest reflection of the number of homes that we have lined up in one form or another, with a variety of projects, all with an eye towards construction kind of getting underway and getting completed over this next 8 years or so.
That's incredible. So 2,000 homes by 2030 in the pipeline. Do you think that, well, I'm thinking about how home ownership feels increasingly out of reach. Maybe share why affordable home ownership is still such an important
Yeah.
part of the solution. And then I'm also thinking with the huge ramp up in scale that you're talking about with number of homes, maybe share a little bit too how the service delivery in those homes might be impacted or change at all.
Yeah, so and I'll go back to two that you mentioned 2,000 homes by 2030. We use two different numbers. So 2,000 homes completed or underway between 2025 and 2030, and all of them completed by 2035. That's our aspiration. And so now your question of why we are remained anchored in home ownership. And so I think first and foremost is because in the North American context, at any rate, there's decades of evidence that homeownership is a proven path to stability and self-reliance. And it is arguably the way our monetary taxation and other systems have also been structured, is that the notion of, and that's very hard to unravel. So on this continent, homeownership has been the proven path to, as I said, stability and self-reliance. And there's tons of research that Habitat has done, that others have done, that have demonstrated that in general, when families become homeowners, their kids do better in school. The parents have income growth that is higher than comparators that are in the rental space. There is stronger community engagement. And then there are those psychic things around the pride, the confidence, the sense of accomplishment from home ownership. And I think importantly, the notion that if you're a young person, you believe you could someday be able to own a home. The research is showing that when renters believe they still have the possibility of owning a home, that does affect how they work, how they save. When there's a sense of futility that it's not going to matter anyway, it does change productivity at work, and it does choose how people save versus I'm just going to spend my money anyway because I'll never own a home. So when you put that in the Canadian context, we end up with stronger communities when we continue to have the possibility of people owning homes, and we end up with a stronger and more productive economy when people believe they can own homes. It doesn't mean ownership is the only the only thing that should be here in our housing continuum. Of course not. But the notion of preserving that possibility that hard work and some perseverance can enable you to own a home is the Canada I grew up in, and it is the Canada myself and my team are committed to preserving.
So you told us why it's such an important part of the housing solution. And I know that Habitat for Humanity focuses on helping families with that affordable home ownership. Can you maybe walk us through for like all our listeners, and maybe especially as you're saying, you're crossing that threshold into creating so many more homes, and you're going to work with nonprofits and everything to fill those homes. How does the model work? Maybe share with us how the model works and the impact. You have spoken to the impact too on families and communities, but how does the model work, and what are kind of the opportunities coming up there?
Yeah, so, and let me, just before I go to that micro level of how it works, I'm going to go back to the macro level of how it works, for the entire housing continuum. And that's importantly when families or individuals have an opportunity to move into a Habitat home as a homeowner, they're freeing up a rental home. And we all understand when a rental home is freed up, well, there's someone else, a family or an individual, where that's the right next home for them. And so in that sense of, we believe having that kind of outlet valve, that bridge to cut across into ownership is part of what creates housing mobility across the entire affordable housing spectrum, and enables us to ensure that when we spend public dollars on affordable housing, that we're not just creating places where people are stuck, but where people can move from being unhoused to transitional housing to supportive housing to affordable rental or RGI, to market rental, and eventually have the possibility of moving into ownership. So now to your question, the micro level. So at the micro level, essentially what we're doing is we are helping families have the home that they need now when their kids can benefit the most from it, and to put them in a position to have that in a way that is affordable. So affordable, as we all know, in the affordable housing space means let's try to make sure people aren't spending more than 30, 32, 35% of their total income on housing. So we use 32% for that, and we include in our housing costs for homeowners that 32% would be the sum of their mortgage, their condo fees, because everything we do is some kind of condo, even if it's a townhouse, and their property tax and their home insurance. So we sort out what's the right income eligibility for our various projects, and it varies from project to project. What's the right income level that would enable 32% to cover what they need. So then we're helping families access a zero down payment mortgage. Their mortgage is with an outside lender, but again, it's based on what they can afford. So they might be moving into a 3-bedroom townhome that's worth $800,000, but their mortgage might be $250,000, or it might be $275,000 or $375,000 based on their income. So that's the first point, having a mortgage that is affordable for them in a home that works for them. And then the second part of that is in return for creating that opportunity for families, when they enter an agreement of purchase and sale with us, are also committing to a resale formula. So that if in the future they're in a position to take the equity they've built in their Habitat home and their increased income and buying power that they have, and they want to move to a market home, they will sell their Habitat home back to us based on a formula that basically is guaranteeing them, we'll buy your home for the entire value of your first mortgage, compounded at 2% a year. And 2%, why 2%? Because it reflects in general what inflation has grown at. And what that means, now back to the macro, is it means that we are always in the future in a position to buy these homes back. So when the governments, philanthropists, volunteers are helping us build these homes and affordable communities, we are all doing so with the confidence of knowing that that is, yes, going to create that stability and equity growth of home ownership for individuals, but it's creating permanently affordable housing assets in our communities.
I was going to ask you one more question about the model. So someone can buy, and then, is there a time limit on the amount of time a family can own a Habitat home?
So in general, like the mortgage agreement that families enter into with us is their 5-year, mortgages with a 25-year amortization is so we're looking towards a 25-year maximum horizon, on the notion that, 25 years is probably the right amount of time that your kids are, raised and launched. And there is, of course, latitude to modify that on a per household basis. And we have some families that are moving within 5 years, and some families that really do want to think of this as their forever home. So that's a bit the way the horizon works. And I should comment, because there may be some listeners that are listening to this thinking, gee, that's not how I thought Habitat worked. And it is true, we've modified our homeownership program over the years in response to these changing external circumstances.
Is there like an average? Like, would you say that you see for families that Habitat is like a stepping stone into their next home or to their dream home in a lot of cases?
Because of the changes in our model over the years, at the moment, we wouldn't say there's an average over a comparable average over our time horizon. What I would say we're seeing more recently is we are seeing more families. We're seeing a slightly increased level of kind of family mobility and families moving, taking their equity and moving on from their homes. And again, that means fantastic. That means they're doing okay, and they're freeing up a home that we make available to another similarly qualified homeowner.
You served on Ontario's Housing Affordability Task Force, which set a goal of building 1.5 million homes over 10 years. Can you comment on how are we doing so far and what barriers still need to be addressed to meet that target?
Yeah, and so first of all, it was a privilege to serve on that task force. I was one of 9 people on it. We were deeply grateful for all the input that we got in a deep period of time, and we did our best then in 2022 to say, okay, here's what we think Ontario would benefit Ontario. I think everybody recognizes that 1.5 million goal that we set, we're not going to make. Right, everyone understands we have the opposite occurring over this last 18 months with the market shut down, and it's probably important to share with you that when we set that $1.5 million or 1.5 home goal, we knew from our math that was well below what we actually needed. But the discussion that we had as a task force was, yeah, but we need a stretch goal here that's realistic. So I can certainly tell you as a member of the task force, it's really disappointing to see us going in the opposite direction and knowing that we're not going to meet that 1.5 million goal. Now, on the other hand, I think it's really important to give the government of Ontario and municipalities credit for the considerable efforts that have been made and the number of things that task force report pointed to that have gotten underway. So there have been extensive changes to the planning, approvals process, red tape, land utilization, et cetera. The development charge reductions, 4 years ago, most people in the public and in the media, had never heard of development charges, didn't talk about them at all. The knowledge of development charges and how they have come to be a problem, and the fact that we have every level of government now talking about how to reduce them, is real progress here. The recognition that we, in turn, need a serious and different way of investing in our infrastructure. The pipes, the community services, et cetera, that our communities need, wastewater management, et cetera, that we need a different way of doing that. And the fact that there's, the pilot and Peel around how can we take a different approach to a municipal service organization, corporation, to pay for our water and wastewater in a different way. That's positive, and that's progress. The fact that HST has been removed, at least for a period of time, from all new homes, HST at the provincial and the federal level, is very positive. And to give the government of Ontario its due, that was a big push by the government of Ontario. And then, specific to my world at Habitat for Humanity, it's gotten less media coverage, but the Ontario government's been very progressive, together with the City of Toronto, on demonstration projects through the City of Toronto New Deal. So we have an attainable housing project underway now, which is built in a modern modular format or a panelized format. We have another one that will be announced shortly. So those are all positive things. The challenge is there's getting the changes started and then getting them fully internalized and our system rewired to work better. Takes a lot more time and patience than any of us would want.
Yeah. I think patience is a good word for working in the space right now. From your perspective, what are some of the biggest misconceptions people have about affordable housing and the families who need it?
So, I think I'd give you 2 headlines on that. So the first headline is it's maybe not a misconception, but I get frustrated at how out of touch or disconnected from the problem that some people kind of born in the 70s and earlier are. on this. And so what I mean by that is the number of times I've heard people say, hey, if people can't afford to live here, like they should just go live somewhere else. And that's being said by people who, have long since paid off their own home. And these are folks that are expecting if they go to the ER, it's going to be well staffed. As I said earlier, if they're hoping that their children or grandchildren will have good teachers, good child educators, they're counting on that in their community. If they go out for dinner or to a Raptors game, they're counting on having great staff supporting them. When they put their garbage on the curb, they're counting on people that are coming to pick it up, or when the snow needs to be removed. And so I think that notion of, hey, just go live somewhere else forgets that. No. Our communities run when all the people we need to have here are here and can afford to be here. So the other part of the misconception, or the kind of being a bit out of touch, is Habitat has taken some degree of criticism for the fact that we're now approving families who have a total household income, mom's income, dad's income, child tax benefit, that may be over $100,000. And I get that, because when I was growing up, $100,000 seemed like so much money. But most of the criticism comes from people who have long since kind of blown past that income level and have paid for their homes and don't fully appreciate how hard it is to find an affordable home and raise a family on $100,000, $120,000, $150,000. So that's the first kind of set of misconceptions of just kind of being disconnected from the problem. And then the other misconception is, and I think you probably...
Before you go to the next one, are you saying that you're facing criticism that people feel the income bracket is too low?
Too high. That people feel, wow, what's Habitat for Humanity doing? Helping families that are on the sunshine list.
Okay, yeah, that's how I would have thought the criticism was. But then when you were saying that it's generally people who are in a position of privilege that are kind of calling that out, how do the two align?
And as I said, and I think that's partly because people that are in a position of privilege often have just lost an appreciation of, if you only have $120,000 and you don't own your home, or you weren't able to get into a rent controlled apartment in 2014, this is how much it costs to raise a family here. So I think there's just a degree of being out of touch by that. Now, I will also say we also get criticism from some lower income individuals and households who understandably are really disappointed when they apply to Habitat, and they may just be a single parent led household with an income of $37,000, $40,000, and they're really disappointed to learn that we can't help them with their housing needs right now. So but now let me go to the other misconception, and I think you experience this in your world at Blue Door as well, is that there's a sense that people that need affordable housing, that somehow it's their fault, and that if they just work harder and be more disciplined. And I think a lack of appreciation that people who need affordable housing, more often than not, it's because of circumstances, not because of something of their own makings, and especially, as I said, because times have changed so much. And I've talked a lot about Habitat and how that works. The $100,000 isn't your fault that your income is only $100,000 and you need $2,600 a month for a 2-bedroom apartment, or $3,000. That's a circumstance of how much changed in the environment. But let me come all the way back to when you asked me about what home means to me, and thinking about certainty and people who are unhoused. And again, I think there's this sense of somehow if they just work harder or try harder. And when you pause for a second and say, if I don't know if I'm going to make it through the day without my stuff being stolen, and if during the day I actually have to spend time figuring out, where I'm going to sleep tonight, or where I'm going to get my next shower, then it's next to impossible to have the confidence and the energy to apply for a job, let alone keep a job. And I think that gets exponentially even more difficult when addiction or mental health considerations are played in. So all of that comes back to, I think there's a misconception, just try harder, without fully appreciating the context in which people are living their lives.
Yeah, I mean, I think for sure the fact that you brought up of just cost of living has not kept pace, has not matched pace of incomes, and so there's so many more people even below that threshold now that need support. Which, yeah, to your point, it is a tricky predicament. So your leadership spans private sector, healthcare, and now housing. What lessons from those experiences have shaped your approach to tackling complex social challenges like housing affordability?
Yeah, I think I'd say two things. I mean, what really attracted me to Habitat for Humanity when the opportunity came up was using business thinking to do good. And you and your team at Blue Door are great examples of that as well. I think I love business thinking, and I love being able to translate it into producing social good. And I think for those of us that have had that opportunity to be in multiple sectors, that's part of how we can connect the dots. The other thing I'd say, though, thinking about across, the private, the publicly funded, and now the more social enterprise sector that I'm in, is money's not the enemy. Money's the enabler. And I think in both, when I was in healthcare here in the nonprofit sector, there is a tendency of some people when you get into financial conversations and budget to say, hey, I'm not about the money, I'm about the good. And the reality is, especially for those of us in leadership positions, our responsibility is about how do we secure the money, but how do we maximize the good we can do from the money, the resources we have. And that phrase, doing more with less, there's some people in all sectors that rail against that. And I actually don't rail against it. I think it's not an oppressive statement. I think it's an energizing and enabling statement, because our responsibility as leaders is to support, first of all, ourselves, our staff, and our organizations to constantly become more capable, to be able to produce more social good with the resources that we can assemble. And so I think that's where I have appreciated the vantage point from the three different sectors to just help inform my own leadership. And as you can tell, ideology on that.
Looking ahead, what innovative approaches, partnerships, or policy changes do you believe could make the greatest difference in improving housing affordability across Canada?
I'm going to be contrary on this one. I think it's understandable that we all like talking about innovation. Government loves talking about innovation. I think the biggest factor as we solve the housing problem is not innovation. I think it's perseverance. My earlier point about we've taken decades as a country to get us to the point we are, which is a precarious point in terms of housing affordability. It is a Gordian, not a multifactorial Gordian knot that takes patience and perseverance to fix. And we have to be careful not to become overly enamored in the flavor of the month, the silver bullets, and be distracted from. It takes perseverance. So sorry to not be a champion of innovation.
I'm sure you are a champion of innovation, because we heard from Josh about the Build Factory, but I hear what you're saying about balancing that. There isn't a silver bullet that's going to, quickly get us out of what we've created here.
And I recognize, my earlier point about, our responsibility is to keep growing ourselves and our organizations in terms of, in terms of our ability to have impact. So of course there's innovation with that, but I think there's also becoming tolerant is often the 10 small, seemingly tiny improvements can create a bigger impact than the one bright, shiny object.
Yeah, it's more about building with the end in mind as compared to flash in the pan today.
Yeah.
What about policy though? Do you think, can you think of any helpful policies that there would be to put in place or to work towards as a nation to kind of accelerate everyone's right to housing?
But I think, a soapbox I've been on for the last year, it's going to come to the money theme again. We're in this moment of the biggest transfer of generational wealth in our history as a nation. A lot of that wealth was created through housing. I think governments need to be way more intentional about how do we activate that wealth for solving the housing problem. And that is two things. I still believe that government should come up with a 5-year kind of time limited additional tax credit for philanthropic donations to housing related projects and charities. That should be incremental to one's giving from the last kind of 3 years, so that you're not just cannibalizing the money that's going to, healthcare and education and arts and other things we really need. But governments should be able to incentivize greater philanthropic giving. And government should also, I think we can do more to incentivize private capital and impact investments coming in. And yeah, that'll mean tax credits, but that is the way that we can free up and better deploy some of the very significant capital that is out there to help solve this problem.
So before we end the show, if you could leave our listeners with one message about the future of affordable housing and home ownership in Canada, what would it be?
I'm going to cheat and do two. One's going to sound negative and one's positive. And so on the negative, I believe this is going to get worse before it gets better. And the upside of that is I think governments of necessity will need to stay the course on doing more for housing. And the other upside is I think there is a point where the generation that's 2 decades behind me is going to rise up and use their voice and become more influential on how do we rebalance how this country works in terms of taxation and lots of other pieces. So it's kind of both a negative and a positive. And the other positive and hopeful thing is I'm just really energized by the talent in the affordable housing sector. The talent that is, decades, I'm getting old here but I'm so energized by seeing who's coming up behind me. Emmy, you're one of them, right? With what you've done at Blue Door and many of your colleagues at Blue Door. You've mentioned Joshua Bernard, who's a great talent in our place. I could name 7, 8, 9, 10, 20 other people at Habitat for Humanity who are great talents and really passionate about making a difference. And the same is true in every corner of affordable housing. So I am super hopeful because of who the current and next generation of leaders are in affordable housing in this country.
My last question really was, what brings you hope that you can share with us?
And there you go. So that's what I have to offer. What brings me hope is who's here to attack the problem.
Thank you, Ene. Any last words of wisdom for our listeners?
I've really appreciated the conversation. Thank you very much. And I think I just, to all of us, remind us, as we go through our day today, to just feel gratitude for that notion of the certainty that each of our respective home circumstances gives us, and to say, okay, what more can I do to make those things that are so meaningful to me become true for more of our fellow citizens.
I love that. Thank you so much, Ian. Thank you for joining the show today. So appreciate you taking the time, and also appreciate your leadership in the space. It's very clearly very thoughtful and knowledgeable. So thank you.
A pleasure. Thanks so much for having me, Emmy.
Take care.
Bye.
Bye. Today's episode featured Ene Underwood, CEO of Habitat for Humanity GTA, whose leadership continues to challenge conventional thinking about housing affordability and the role of home ownership in Canada's housing continuum. The conversation explored Habitat GTA's bold new goal of delivering 2,000 homes in the pipeline by 2030, the growing barriers facing aspiring homeowners, and the partnerships and policy changes needed to create more pathways to affordable home ownership. While the housing challenges facing Canada are significant, this conversation is a reminder that ambitious goals, innovative thinking, and cross-sector collaboration can help build a future where more families have the opportunity to put down roots and build stability through home ownership. Thank you for listening to On the Way Home, a podcast brought to you by Blue Door. Stay tuned for more conversations with the leaders, innovators, and changemakers shaping the future of housing across Canada.
You're listening to On the Way Home with your host, Emmy Kelly.